Minerva's Homeopathic Medical College. Our eminent speaker for today is Dr. Ramya K.R., talking on common gynecological problems in training. Dr. Ramya, hailing from Palakkad, is currently Medical Officer and Directorate of Ayush Delhi since 2017. She had done her UG in Dr. Paddy Medical College, Ernakulam, Government Homeopathic Medical College, Calicut. She had worked as medical officer in NRHM, Kerala, and medical officer of Kerala PSC. She is consultant in gynecology in AIMS Perinthalmanna. Dr. Ramya is IHMA most faculty since 2012. She has her services of clinical practice since 10 years. We welcome you, ma'am. I also welcome our principal, Dr. Praveen Raj, Vice Principal, Dr. Roshni Pinto, and all our attendees. Now, without further ado, I hand over the session to Dr. Ramya. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Hamid. Hope I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am, you're audible, ma'am.
And I'll directly start the seminar because I don't want to waste time. It's a very vast topic. And let me thank you first. It's a pleasure to be with you all. And I hope it is not a boring session. And all of you doctors at after dinner or it is dinner time, still I hope you are interested throughout the session. Okay. So first, let me clear this. I'm not going to give a case presentation, or I'm not going to say that I cured this remedy with this condition with this remedy. Okay. I strongly believe that we are all very good homeopaths, and as homeopathy goes for supports individualization and selection of medicine, I think our doctors themselves have individualized personalities. So their method of treatment is very different, and there are lots of systems springing up. So everybody to their own. Okay. Ultimately, the patient should have relief, and for that, there is one thing we should maintain, that is a high standard of professionalism. We should know when to treat a case and when to refer a case. So when we get a patient in our clinic, we should know how to handle or manage the case so that it doesn't worsen. And we should know the proper time to refer the case. We should be good diagnosticians, okay? So that is what I am going to concentrate on more, okay? And I hope everybody likes it and follows it. So I'm going to start the session. Okay. The first thing in gynecological examination or any case is known as, it is very important, as case taking. The complete history of the patient, of the complaint.
Hello, ma'am.
Complaint.
Ma'am, I think the audio is breaking, ma'am.
Oh, the audio is breaking.
Yes, the voice is a bit feeble, ma'am.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Now I think it's...
Now is it clear?
It's clear, ma'am, but still it's a little breaking, ma'am, like cracking like.
Okay. So what can I do now?
Ma'am, can you just check the plugin of headset in the laptop? I think it's not plugged properly, or might be a little mic problem, ma'am. Can you just bring the mic bit closer?
Okay. Let me see. Should I shift to mobile phone?
I think, ma'am, it's the cracking only. You can, like, ma'am, you can share the slide from the desktop and laptop, You can, for audio and camera, you can use the mobile phone, ma'am. That can be done.
Achha, can I do that?
Yes, ma'am. You can join with the same link from the phone, and slide you'll be sharing from the desktop, and your phone will be better, ma'am.
Okay, I'll try that.
Yes, ma'am.
5 minutes. Okay. Hello.
Hello, ma'am.
Is it okay now?
I think now it's better, ma'am.
Okay. Now is it okay?
Yeah, it's better, ma'am. You can continue, ma'am.
Okay. Sorry for the disturbance. So without much ado, let's continue it because I don't think 1 hour is enough to cover such a vast topic like gynecology. Uh, but still, let's try. So as I was saying, this session is more about how to diagnose a patient and when to give timely reference and plan the treatment so that the person doesn't worsen. Okay. So let's start with the most common complaint we see in OPD, that is a vaginal discharge. See, we call it leukorrhea, but not all vaginal discharge is leukorrhea. So whenever the patient comes with leukorrhea or vaginal discharge, first we have to diagnose the case according to the age of the patient. See, most of the cases coming to us will be adolescent girls, and they usually complain of increased vaginal discharge during menses or during the between menses. Okay, so and most of them will have very white or mucoid discharges, transparent. First of all, uh, convince them, console them. It is a physiological process. Okay, only when there is change in the consistency, then color, order, and too much amount so that it leads to irritation and other problems, dysuria like problems, it is a pathological. Okay. So first of all, and always when a patient comes with a vaginal discharge, for diagnosis, you go from bottom up. Okay, bottom up approach. First think of whatever that is a problem with the perineal skin or vulva skin, and then vagina, conditions in vagina, condition in cervix, and then endometrium. Okay, so it's how you should think of. And proper history taking is very important. So physiologically, why discharge occurs sometimes in neonate and infants. That's because of the estrogen from maternal estrogen circulating in the blood. Okay. Then pre-pubertal period when they are nearing menarche, there is uterine congestion, there is hormonal action, and that leads to a little increase in vaginal vaginal discharge. Then during pregnancy and childbearing age, during every menstrual cycle, there is physiological increase in the vaginal discharge during menses and prior to menses and during the time of ovulation. Okay. So first, let us see the most common presentation or the most common cause of vaginal discharge in infancy and childhood. Okay. Now the child is, if it is very small, that is infants less than 1 year or neonates, may sometimes present with vaginal discharge, which is usually blood stained or serous discharge, a serosanguinous discharge may be there. So remember, it is due to cervical erosion. When we study chronic cervicitis and cervical erosion, we study three types. Okay, congenital or simple erosion, that is due to the persistence of maternal estrogen in the fetal blood. Okay, no, in the neonate's blood. So there will be some amount of irritation in the cervix on examination. And there will be a little bit of vaginal discharge that will go off spontaneously. Okay. The other condition is low immunity. When the natural bacteria is less, natural immunity is less, the child is very weak and all that. They are in that conditions, there may be increase in vaginal body and vaginal secretion. And always think of infection, foreign body, and any tumor, especially in very small kids. Not tumor, sorry, infection, foreign body, and any allergens. Irritants and allergens is most probably the main cause when vaginitis presents in childhood. Sorry, not vaginitis. Vaginal discharge is seen in childhood. Okay. So, first of all, as for if there is a child has any complaints of worms or any skin conditions, if there is itching with vaginal discharge and especially nocturnal night time, along with NS, it will be worms, enterobiasis, and foreign body. It is very important. You know, you'll be surprised to see what all the things the kids play with and where at all they put what all orifices they inserted into. So you should be clear about that. And allergens and irritants an important cause. Sometimes moms, especially in infants, perennial talc will be used. Johnson baby powder laga ke means they want to keep it dry and good, so they use talc, and you should really stop it because perennial talc can cause ovarian tumor as a child grows. Okay, so that should be looked for. And the use of soaps. Some kids, you see, I had a very interesting case. This child of about 6 years old, she presented with vaginal discharge. Uh, First, we thought it is due to worms because she had complaints of worms, and deworming was done regularly for about 3 months. Every month, it is usually given in 6 months, between 6 months, after 6 months. But we did it every month. She used to take albendazole when she came to me, but still irritation was there, vaginal discharge was there. And then when I talked to the child, I came to realize that she bats alone. Her mom doesn't let her. So what she does is she uses soap as she's brushing her teeth in the vagina. Okay. So the natural vaginal bacteria is destroyed, and the other anaerobes has colonized it. Maybe that's because of that, and that there is also irritation. Okay. So that was the reason for the vaginal discharge. When she stopped it, the vaginal discharge subsided by itself. Okay. So in children, always think of foreign bodies, allergens, and irritants before prescribing. And constipation. Constipation may have cause pelvic congestion, and sometimes if it is very severe, it may cause increase in vaginal discharge. Okay. And foreign bodies in case of adults will be contraceptive devices, slabs, shampoos, and if there is foreign body, the vaginal discharge becomes very purulent, foul smelling, and bloody. Okay. And most important, if you are if into practicing gynecology or interested in practicing gynecology, always do the physical examination, gynecological examination, that is PV. If possible, if your clinic, you can do it, the speculum examination and bimanual examination is very important. very important. Okay, if you do all this, most of the conditions, gynecological conditions, along with imaging techniques, we can diagnose very easily. So the next is leukorrhea in little girls. We have most common remedies. See, Merxol and Sepia is the most common 3-mark remedies. This is Kent, and I prescribe Merxol in case of worms. So if the children present with leukorrhea along with worms, I give Merxol. Okay, and Sepia is kind of a favorite remedy. It is very so it's kind of a specific remedy for leukorrhea as far as I am concerned because of the offensive discharge. Okay. Now we come to the adulthood or the reproductive age. The reproductive age, uh, leukorrhea, it is the most common causes of specific vaginitis when the normal Dodderling's bacilli is replaced with other anaerobes. And we have 3 most common organisms which causes vaginitis. The most common, almost 50%, is due to bacterial vaginosis. That is, it is a colony of bacteria, especially Gardnerella and Haemophilus vaginalis, which colonizes the vagina and causes increased discharge. See, bacterial vaginosis is very important because 50% is asymptomatic, but only 50% is symptomatic. Out of the 50%, what we have is only a thin, transparent or gray discharge. So we usually think it is very similar to a bland discharge. It is very normal leukorrhea. We may confuse it with normal leukorrhea, but remember, if it is recurrent in spite of treatment, you should always think of bacterial vaginosis because bacterial vaginosis predisposes to PID, and recurrent PID may cause endometrial hyperplasia and endometrial CA. So the sequel or the complications is very bad. So always think, don't hesitate to do vaginal swab or vaginal culture along with pap smear if there is recurrent infections. It is like kind of we are cheating the patient, doing a wrong to the patient if we are not sending for this investigations. Okay. So vaginal bacteriosis, there is thin grayish discharge, and the one thing to differentiate it, and it is very difficult to detect because of no pruritus and no inflammation. On examination, there will be no inflammation, there will be no pruritus. For diagnosis, there is an Ansel criteria, which is gray white discharge, and it is the organism grows in alkaline pH. The pH is different, and clue cells will be there. That is the vaginal cells. The cells, epithelial cells, will be bordered with the bacilli. Bacilli will be adherent to it. And with test is if you add 10% KOH, it will give a fishy odor. So the discharge has a fishy odor and gray discharge, white gray discharge. No pruritus, no dysuria sometimes. Okay. But when it goes to PID, there may be lower abdominal pain, slight fever, and all that. Next most common condition is candidiasis. Candidiasis, we all know, fungus. It causes inflammation and curd-like discharge, or cotton cheese appearance of the vulva will be there. Vagina will be there. On vaginal examination, we can see the patches or white plaques. On a removal, there will be petechiae. So as you all know, it is antibiotics, increase antibiotics, lower body immunity, diabetes, obesity, pregnancy, and all these conditions increases candidiasis. Now, candidiasis and trichomonas infection, these are both sexually transmitted. That is, the patient, the male partner of the patient should be treated along with this, or else there will be recurrence. Recurrent candidiasis means if there is 4 episodes within 1 year, it is recurrent candidiasis, and it has complications may be there. So you have to treat it. Complications in the sense of quality of life will be very much decreased. It may cause dyspareunia. It may cause chronic backache. It may cause backache. Okay. So the quality of life will be decreased in candidiasis. Now, Trichomonas vaginitis, it is a mainly sexually transmitted disease, and it causes yellowish green white frothy discharge. The discharges will tell for about creosotum, and there will be very severe itching. In candidiasis also that will be very bad. In this also there will be very severe itching with dysuria and dyspareunia. And there is signs of vaginal mucosal inflammation. what we call a strawberry cervix. There will be pitting vertical spots will be there in Trichomonas vaginitis. Okay, and this also predisposes to PID. So always, and this Trichomonas and bacterial vaginosis grows in alkaline pH. So for diagnosing all this, and then the next common is chlamydia and neisseria, which are most common causes for PID. So that is mostly asymptomatic and which may be present as urethritis and with vein discharges. Okay. More commonly, the urinary symptoms will be there, and it will be like indolent or in discrete infections. So I'm stressing the point, if the leukorrhea is persistent and there is change in the color or the nature and there is offensiveness, do go for the wet mount smear, vaginal smear, cervical smear, vaginal culture may be required sometimes. The discharge may, and then pap smear is also recommended. Okay. Now the other cause for vaginal discharge is cervical erosion, that is chronic cervicitis. What happens in chronic cervicitis is there is inflamed cervix with initial discharges will be there, and as it heals, it occludes the mucus glands, and sometimes Nabothian cyst may form. It is very common. It doesn't cause much symptoms. Sometimes there may be dysmenorrhea, dyspareunia may be there. There will be increased discharges and heaviness felt in this region. But Nabothian follicle or Nabothian cyst as such, it doesn't require treatment. But cervical erosion, that really causes little bit of intermenstrual bleeding and postcoital bleeding, and it causes dyspareunia. Deep dyspareunia is there. On speculum examination, we can see this red and reddish area, spongy area. So for cervical polyp, vaginal discharge, it is actually antibiotic treatment is there, but we can treat with our medicine. Lots of medicine is there, Argentum, Hydrastis, Calibite, Riozotam. Very wonderful medicines are there. We can think of it. And then cervical polyp. Cervical polyps are actually benign tumors, and they are seen as smooth reddish protrusion in the cervix. Usually they do not cause any symptoms, but when it is very large, it causes dyspareunia or discomfort, and it may be protrude into the vagina. Okay, so usually it doesn't cause much problem. It also causes intermenstrual bleeding and postcoital bleeding. Okay, so this we have to differentiate with the other conditions which causes intermenstrual bleeding and postcoital bleeding, which is mainly CA cervix. Okay. So as the women ages, reproductive, now we have passed the reproductive age. Now senile vaginitis we see in postmenopausal women, that is atrophic vaginitis. Due to decrease in estrogen, vaginal wall thinning will be there and decreased acidic environment. It may present as mainly dryness. The patient complains of dryness, itchiness, dysuria, dyspareunia, and postcoital bleeding. Postcoital bleeding in an older age women always go for pap smear and cervical biopsy, because the chances of CA cervix is very, we should not miss the diagnosis. So I had a patient, I'll show you that. She was around 65 years of age. She presented with this dysuria, the dryness of vagina with offensive discharge. It was kind of burning discharge. And usually in our culture, women don't come out with the problems, especially elderly women. They are usually neglected by their children. So by the time she came to me, it was around, she had been having the discharge for about 3 months. So I had sent her for what is that name? I had sent her for pap smear followed by cervical biopsy. She had stage 2 cervical cancer. Okay. So see, cervical staging of cervical cancer, stage 1, even in stage 1, let's come to that. This is a case. She had a biopsy cervix, she had keratinizing squamous cell carcinoma was diagnosed, an exophytic lesion. The lesion was very uh, 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 prominent, even a normal specular examination even would have revealed the lesion, but she came very late at a late stage. Okay, so we shouldn't do the mistake. As doctors, we should be very vigilant in detecting such cases. So we all know CS cervix is the most common cause of common CA. Now it has replaced breast cancers in India as the most common cancer. Young age, sexual unhygiene, coitus before 18 years or 16 years, multiple sexual partners, delivery of the first baby before the age of 20 years, and STD, HIV infections. Can you tell me which is the HPV virus, which are the strains which predisposes to cervical cancer? Chats? Any chats? Okay, so it is 16 and 18, HPV 16 and 18. The pathological type is squamous cell carcinoma. See, the type of growth may be exophytic, cauliflower filling the vaginal wall, endophytic, that is, it means a hard mass, indurated feeling will be there, or it may present as an ulcer. So in cervical cancer, when we send for pap smear, the staging will be, the result will be like uh, HSIL and LSIL, that is low-grade squamous intraepithelial lesions and high-grade squamous intraepithelial lesions. This is actually the CIN, that is cervical intraepithelial neoplasia, that is the pre-invasive stage of cancer. Okay, before cancerous stage, the dysplastic stage is there. CA cervix. CI, pre-invasive CIN stage 0. Okay. CIN is cervical intraepithelial neoplasia when the dysplastic or atypical cells are present only in the less than 1/3 of the epithelium. Okay. So when it is greater than 1/3, around 1/3, it is stage 1. 2/3, it is stage 2. CIN stage 2. And stage 3, it has almost gone down into the epithelium, the whole of epithelium, it is carcinoma in situ. Okay, so stage 0, stage 1 and stage 2, sometimes it can recover spontaneously. So if at all we are ready to treat it, remember it is only to stage CIN 2 we can treat, with the caution that we have to do a pap smear every 6 months, followed by every 1 year in active women with who is sexually active. And if 5 or 6 pap smears is okay, then every 3 years. Okay, so the histological type is squamous cell carcinoma. Stage B. Okay. So carcinoma in situ, the survival rate is 100%. So from CIN 3 itself, they go for treatment. Okay, that is surgical treatment, especially hysterectomy, and if needed, when it goes into the invasive stage, radiation is needed. Okay. Next is CA endometrium. And sometimes in CA cervix, it also causes putrid or foul smelling discharges. But the most common cause for dirty, foul smelling discharge from vagina, from endometrium, there is no symptoms of PID. The most common cause of pyometra is actually CA endometrium. CA endometrium should be suspected in people with history of risk factors like hormone replacement therapy, especially estrogen, tamoxifen for breast tumors, dysfunctional uterine bleeding, even PCOD, recurrent PID, fibroids, all these conditions. That is, any condition which is increase in estrogen will lead to, it is a high risk for CA endometrium. Okay, always think of that. And also early menarche and late menopause. Okay, CA endometrium is adenocarcinoma. Again, we have to suspect it when there is postmenopausal bleeding. Postmenopausal bleeding and the endometrial thickness on USG, if in any postmenopausal women, if it is greater than 4 millimeter, always suspect endometrial hyperplasia and refer for endometrial biopsy. Usually they do endometrial biopsy and mostly hysterectomy is recommended. But we can see later, since we can see how we can avoid it. Okay, so this is C endometrium. The most common symptom is dirty, foul-smelling vaginal discharge. So in stage 1, as tumor is limited to the endometrium, even in that stage, when we have the tumor is limited to the endometrium or it is limited to the uterus, stage 1 and 2, endometrium and myometrium, stage 1A, 1B, only hysterectomy is required. Later, we need hysterectomy followed by pelvic irradiation. That is called as brachytherapy. Okay, so early detection is again very important. So that's it about vaginal discharge. Um, okay. So we next go to the most common presentation again. It is the irregular bleeding. Okay, abnormal uterine bleeding. Usually, patient don't say that always it is very heavy bleeding, menorrhagia, or always it is intermenstrual bleeding. They don't, they can't. Most of them they don't maintain a menstrual diary. Okay, most of the patient, if you ask them, they can't remember their last periods. So first, before starting a treatment, advise the patient to have a menstrual diary so that they can clearly record each menstrual cycle, what is the date, how was the nature of the flow, how long was there, and all that. So abnormal uterine bleeding, the definition is bleeding from uterine corpus that is abnormal and regularity, that is the cycle, length of the cycle. Length of the cycle is usually 21 to 35 days, right? And that is 28 plus or minus 7. The volume is usually 30 to 50 ml. If it is greater than 80 ml, it is called as heavy menstrual bleeding, or what we used to call as menorrhagia. Then the frequency should be like, it should be within 21 to 35 days. Okay, the frequency should be okay. If it is less than 21 days, it is polymenorrhea. And if it is greater than 31 days, it used to be called as oligomenorrhea. And duration, how much days it is persisting, 2 to 7 days or 2 to 8 days. Okay, so in the definition itself, there is a clause that occurs in the absence of pregnancy. So for abnormal uterine bleeding, first of all, you have to do is urine pregnancy test. In our situation, it doesn't matter if she is, she's saying that the women are saying that no chances there, but first you always do UPT first and then go for blood test. Okay, the first test to do is UPT, urine pregnancy test, so that our differential diagnosis of ectopic pregnancy and abortion, we can cut it off. Okay, so this abnormal uterine bleeding may present as acute bleeding or chronic bleeding. The management in these two conditions is very different. So what we know, acute bleeding, it will be very present as menorrhagia, it will be gushing and all that. We have very wonderful remedies for that. And the main complication in this is anemia. You have to control anemia, and the patient have chronic fatigue, mental stress will be there. So I think our medicines work wonderfully in this. And I have particularly got good results from phosphorus, because especially in metrorrhagia with fibroids, especially the single remedy in Kent and the 5-mark remedy, 4-mark remedy in synthesis is phosphorus. Okay, so phosphorus I have got results with 1M also in 30 repeated potency also. Okay, along with this we can have lots of n numbers of tinctures. Is there millefolium, clapsy, even hamamelis, okay, erigeron, is there a stilago, is there? According to the nature of the discharges, we can select the tinctures also. And Sabina 30 is a very favorite remedy for everybody. So let's see into the process for abnormal uterine bleeding. Okay, abnormal uterine bleeding, we can divide into structural causes and non-structural causes. Structural causes is easily identifiable. You just go for an ESG or USG or imaging techniques, you get it. That is a polyp endometrial polyp or cervical polyp. As I said earlier, it causes intermenstrual bleeding, postmenopausal bleeding, and cervical polyp may cause postcoital bleeding. Okay. USG, you can detect it. That is as simple as that. Then adenomyosis, leiomyoma, that is uterine fibroid. Then malignancy. Okay, that is PALM, and non-structural causes okay, coagulopathy. So first of all, when a patient presents with heavy menstrual bleeding or intermenstrual bleeding, that is metrorrhagia or menometrorrhagia, you should always go test for coagulopathy. That is the complete blood count along with bleeding time, clotting time, prothrombin time, and partial thromboplastin time, PTT. Okay. Then you should think of ovulatory dysfunctions. This is what we used to study as the ovulatory and endometrial non-structural causes. This is what we used to study as dysfunctional uterine bleeding. You remember dysfunctional uterine bleeding, that is bleeding from the uterus in absence of any pathological condition on examination, right? So the DUB term, it is kind of old. From 2011, the FIGO is using this classification, that is abnormal uterine bleeding, and the classification of PALM and Cohen. Okay. Now, iatrogenic conditions, any drugs, any blood thinning drugs, anticoagulants the patient is taking, even oral contraceptive pills and intrauterine devices can cause abnormal bleeding. See, in oral contraceptive pills, you all know that it causes anovulatory bleeding, right? When you give combined oral contraceptive pills with estrogen, progesterone, it causes anovulation. So there is only estrogen, there is no progesterone because corpus luteum is not formed. Sorry, in anovulation, then for oral COC when you are given, it is usually withdrawal bleeding on stoppage of both estrogen and progesterone, that is bleeding. So when the patient is starting oral contraceptive pills for the first 3 or 4 months, she may present with irregular bleeding episodes. It may be a little heavy and all that. We have to just reassure the patient. And then also intrauterine devices, there may be this bleeding, which really the patient panics and comes to us, and it is one of the main causes for removal of IUCD. Okay. One is they complain of obesity and all that, and they have a fear of penetration and lots of myths surrounding it because we are into family planning. So most of the ladies, they are very reluctant to use IUDs, and also once they put an IUDs, the removal rate within the first 6 months is very uh, more than uh, what is good, because the main thing is their anxiety. Okay, I'm having irregular periods. There are lots of blood loss and all that. So we have to reassure the patient in this. Okay, not otherwise classified the other systemic diseases, thyroid diseases, or any other conditions can come in that. So AUB, it may be HMB, heavy menstrual bleeding, intermenstrual bleeding. It's like that. The classification goes like this. Now we'll see different conditions and in different age groups. See, always think of the age groups in diagnosing. So it is adolescent to adult age group, any age group 13 to 18. First is anovulation. We know anovulation, that is what we studied in DUB, dysfunctional uterine bleeding. We used to study it as anovulatory and ovulatory. See, anovulatory 80% causes DUB, and ovulatory conditions it is 20%. So anovulation, when does it occur? During early menarche, the patient is just, the hormones are just adjusting, there is the changes in FSH and LH and slowly reacting. At that time, early menarche, people, the patient come with this. Na? That is, first I had a menses, it was a heavy flow, and then for 3 months I had nothing, and then there is again bleeding. So that causes very much anxiety in the mother also, in the child also, the young girl also. So we should reassure them. And in these cases, we can think of lots of remedies, that is Pulsat, Lagrapagis, Nitramute, Calicarb, and all that, okay, for a re-establishment of first menses. That it's a keynote symptoms. So Nitramute fails, Calicarb is used, and wonderful remedies we have in that, okay. So we can think of that. So sometimes there may be pelvic infection because of hygiene, or there may be sexual relationship which the patient is not uh, ready to reveal and all that. So we should take a very good history, okay, and coagulopathy and tumors. In most cases, there is dysregulation of the hypothalamo-pituitary ovarian axis. That is, PCOD can also present as abnormal uterine bleeding. That is, that may be symptoms of amenorrhea followed by heavy bleeding, but mostly it is oligomenorrhea or hypomenorrhea. So let's see that. Then the same thing in reproductive age group, it is mostly fibroids, endometriosis, endometrial hyperplasia, and all that. And always in late stage, be very cautious in 40, above 40, 45 years, premenopausal, postmenopausal women. We should always think of endometrial hyperplasia, endometrial carcinoma. Okay. So what are the investigations? As I told earlier, always go for examination test, pregnancy test, pap smear, the imaging, ultrasound, hysteroscopy. Ultrasound, always go for transvaginal scan. Okay, that is that detects more abnormalities. And if the patient has a risk of, especially like PID, that is history of PID, that is history of DUB and all that, endometrial sampling can also be suggested. Okay, and that is, we should go for direct treatment of underlying cause. So fibroids, I'm not going too much into it. Okay, so we all know the classification, intramural and subseral. The safest is intramural. The most difficult to treat is submucous. Submucous variety bleeding is more. Backache and other symptoms are more. Abortion, tendency for abortion is more. So it may present as infertility, and dysmenorrhea is more. Okay. So menorrhagia, the most common fibroid symptoms is menorrhagia, dysmenorrhea, that is congestive dysmenorrhea. Then intermenstrual bleeding may be there, heavy bleeding will be there. Okay. So fibroids, when to refer? I tell you, less than 5 centimeter, allopathic protocol, it says that no treatment is required. Less than 5 centimeter with heavy pain, bleeding, and pain, heavy bleeding, and infertility, treat the symptoms. Greater than 10 centimeter, we require this treatment is necessary because of the bulkiness. It causes lots of symptoms. Okay, the patient may have anemia, chronic anemia. And so another important thing, what and all we have to advise patient with fibroid. See, fibroid is hereditary, so if there are patient family history, mother or relative have fibroid, no, mother has fibroids, then you have to caution the young women with presenting with DUB or PCOD to decrease weight. Obesity is the main cause, it's a risk factor for fibroid. Nulliparous women, low immunity even causes fibroid and DUB, endometriosis. So, so advise rich, good food, fruits diet. Red meat should be avoided. And vitamin D deficiency is found to be associated with fibroids. So especially you can think of, especially in cities like big cities like Delhi, vitamin D, if it's seen mostly in such cases, it will be decreased. And along with our treatment, we have to advise polyunsaturated fatty acids, omega fatty acid rich food, that is small fish and all that, nuts, seeds, flax seeds and oils and all that, along with the vitamin D. Okay. So that is fibroid. So the treatment is up to 5 centimeter. And remember, perimenopausal women, if we see small fibroids, we can treat with uh, much confidence, because after menopause, it is fibroids is estrogen dependent. So after menopause, it will regress in size. And also, if it is less than 5 centimeter, we can wait and treat. But if it is more than 10 centimeter, sometimes it may cause heavy bleeding, which may go to anemia and require blood transfusion, but treat with caution. Okay, and USG should be repeated every 6 months. See, and so fibroids, 50% will be asymptomatic and 50% will be symptomatic. Very troublesome. So this is a lady who came with actually back pain. She had symptoms of IUD, so MRI spine was suggested, and she got subserosal staging. Okay, there was no symptoms. So this is another case. This was bulky uterus with multiple intramural fibroids. See, fibroids are sometimes associated with follicular cyst of ovaries. Okay, The ovary is enlarged with multiple cysts and one endometrial cyst is noticed. But the cyst, see the size is very less. So we'll discuss it when we come to ovarian cyst. The common remedy, we all know lots of remedies are there, let's skip it. So endometriosis, again endometriosis is the reproductive age group. It is a very difficult condition to manage and we should diagnose it as early as possible because the complications of endometriosis is very bad. It causes adhesions, the adnexia and the fallopian tubes, everything becomes like a big mass, and it causes infertility in most of the cases. Okay, so and recurrence, there is 60 to 70% of recurrence. So as early as endometriosis is detected, it is a boon. It will be a bit better for the patient, and it is very difficult to control also because menses happens every time, and every time menses happens, there is a retrograde pill or whatever the reason, then there will be new implants, right? So how does endometriosis present? There are 4 Ds for endometriosis. That is, sometimes it may be asymptomatic, that is unexplained. Infertility may be there, everything may be normal, the hormones, everything may be normal. And on laparoscopy, we can see very small, minute spots of endometriosis that actually makes the endometrium the for not favorable for implantation. Okay, so endometriosis main symptoms are 4 Ds. That is dysmenorrhea. It will be very painful dysmenorrhea and congestive dysmenorrhea. That is, it starts 2 to 3 days before menses, and throughout the onset it will be there. There may be chronic pelvic pain. The other day is deep dyspareunia. That is painful coition. When it is involves the ureter and broad ligament, that area, it causes dysuria, that is hematuria. When bladder involvement is there or frequent micturition is there, dyschezia, that is hematochezia, bowel involvement, that is bleeding for rectum may be there with constipation or frequent urging to stools. See, all the symptoms may also happen in fibroid when according to the location, right? The most common site of endometriosis is ovary, and in ovary it causes chocolate cyst, that is accumulation of blood collection. There are endometrial acid sheds during every menses. As the blood is shed, it is collected in the ovary and it becomes an ovarian cyst, which is also called as endometrioma. Okay, endometrioma. So dysmenorrhea, dysphoria, dysuria, dyschezia with menorrhagia. Okay. See, these are the symptoms and signs. For this, bimanual examination is very important because we can see tenderness, nodularity, or adnexal tenderness or adnexal marks can actually be felt. Okay, the gold standard is again laparoscopy and 6 to 8 months observation. If at all we are treating endometriosis, every 6 months we have to go for review, ultrasound investigations, imaging. TVS is better. Okay, and if it is refractive, better refer because the complication is endometrial CA and adhesions which may cause the patient her infertility. Okay, so this patient, see, she is 39 years of age. She has left ovarian chocolate cysts with multiple intramural fibroids. See, fibroids and endometriosis usually associated. The fibroid was actually small, and she had also chronic cervicitis. So it was a complex case with lots of symptoms. She presented with actually dysmenorrhea and menorrhagia. So left ovarian chocolate cyst is there. Laparoscopic examination is gold standard. Remember that. Now adenomyosis actually endometrial tissue within the wall of the uterus. That is the myometrium. It occurs in women greater than 40 years. Nulliparous women. In this case also the uterus is enlarged. There is enlargement of abdomen. The patient complains with enlargement of abdomen. That is about 3 months pregnancy. That is about 12 weeks of enlargement. There is menorrhagia, dysmenorrhea and dyspareunia. Okay. So menorrhagia is more prominent with a bulky uterus. In transvaginal scan, we can see a bulky uterus. There will be symmetrical enlargement of uterus and then it will be tender uterus on bimanual palpation, and it is called as Halban sign. Okay? So the difference in adenomyosis is common in multiparous women. See all the other cases in fibroid also, in endometriosis, all nulliparous women, endometrial CA in nulliparous women with early menarche and late menopause. For adenomyosis occurs in multiparous women also, 40 years of age, and it is an adenomyosis, cause for adenomyosis. Now, how to differentiate an intramural fibroid and adenomyosis? You need to do MRI, and gynecologists usually go for it. Okay, see, this is a rare case in which the patient presented with actually menorrhagia, and that is menorrhagia was she had prolonged interval of what's it, prolonged secondary amenorrhea. Amenorrhea will be there like 6 months, 7 months, and then heavy bleeding used to be there. Okay, so actually there was a doubt for adenomyosis. But the patient didn't return actually. She had this complaint also, and she had infertility. Infertility in the sense she was married about 19 years of age. Even after 3 years of marriage, she didn't have kids. This was just the first round. Okay, maybe she would have gone for further checkups and all that. Maybe endometriosis may have been there. Whatever it is, she didn't return. So this is like included in just to stress that there is nothing definitive in gynecology. The symptoms are all mixed up. The conditions will be all mixed up, and always do a thorough investigation. So perimenopausal period, we earlier said that simple hypoplasia will be there. No hypoplasia, chance of hypoplasia. Always go do endometrial biopsy or further investigations in postmenopausal women or postmenopausal bleeding, and see postmenopause in the sense and that if the patient doesn't have menses for about 1 year, then it is called as menopause, and postmenopausal bleeding is after menopause, 1 year of menopause or six months to 1 year. Some books say that it is 1 year. After 1 year of menopause, the patient starts bleeding. It is called as postmenopausal bleeding. Okay. See, postmenopausal bleeding is considered endometrial cancer until proven otherwise. So go for it. So investigations already we have done. DUB we have, I said it earlier. Then the other condition we usually study in Shaw's textbook is metropathia hemorrhagica. That is a condition of end at the endometrial tissue. The stroma glands, the stroma is decreased and glands are increased. It is actually a diagnosis only by DNC, but the dilatation and curettage or the histopathology is seen. There will be enlarged glands, like cystic appearance and Swiss cheese appearance. Clinically, we just know that it is annulatory bleeding and it will be heavy bleeding. Okay, and all that. So the another thing, ovulatory conditions also it may present with irregular bleeding, like heavy bleeding and all that. That is IUCDs. And this one important condition is the deficient corpus luteum. That is the corpus luteum does not form normally, so that the progesterone is not produced for the required amount. The progesterone is less than 5 nanogram per ml in the late phase of menses, so that the endometrium is not developed properly, and there is recurrent abortions on which may cause infertility. That is corpus luteal deficiency, CLD it is called, due to deficient corpus luteum. It may cause early spotting, that is early spotting and early bleeding. Okay. Now endometrial hypoplasia, there is two divisions, that is with atypia and without atypia. When there is atypia in the cells, refer. Without atypia, we can easily treat with 6 months of follow-up every 6 months. See this woman, 41 years of age, she presented with introverted bulky uterus with endometrial thickness. The endometrial thickness was, where is that? It is 12.4 millimeter, okay. So 10th July, I have actually referred her for further investigations. Not yet come back because of this COVID and all. We are giving medicine for 20 days, or we are only calling up for follow-up after 20 days or 15 days. See, there is another case. Referred it and it came back with simple hypoplasia endometrium with atypia. There was chronic cervicitis. So it causes this chronic cervicitis called thoda sa postmenopausal bleeding and intermenstrual bleeding. but it was nothing to worry about. It was without atypia, so we can treat it. The other is bulky uterus. It is a 47-year-old woman. She presented with PCOD, and it was uh, a little confusing. Whatever, she had bulky uterus, that is endometrial hyperplasia is there. So there is chances of um, hyperplasia, but still she is her periods are regular. It's scanty, but it is regular. So I thought maybe after 6 months we will review it. So dysmenorrhea, primary dysmenorrhea is sometimes what painful menses occurring in healthy women with no disease of uterus or other pelvic organs. Okay. So primary dysmenorrhea, as you all know, first day of onset. It occurs before 2 to 3 hours of onset, and it will be on the first day. No reason. It is the most common cause of absenteeism and all that in school girls and young girls. Usually, it improves after childbirth. We have very wonderful remedies for it. Then secondary dysmenorrhea, whenever there is a pathology, we have dysmenorrhea, painful menses, it is secondary. We have seen fibroids, endometriosis, adhesions, adenomyosis, all this we have seen. Let's go to PID. Now, see here, this dysmenorrhea and dysmenorrhea along with infertility is there. Always think of endometriosis and do investigations. Okay. See here, the 39-year-old woman had chocolate cyst and intramural fibroids. Everything was mixed up. So pelvic inflammatory disease, it may present as acute or chronic condition. Acute, we can easily diagnose. There will be lower abdominal pain, there will be vaginal discharge, there will be high grade fever and all that. The CBC, the white blood cells will be increased, C-reactive protein may be increased. It is easily diagnosed. So let's leave it. Okay. So the chronic PID, this is what we have to detect. It is due to sexual STDs are the most common, and we have to do bimanual examination. If there is abdominal tenderness with menorrhagia and dysmenorrhea, always go for think of PID and do the USG. But laparoscopy, if done, it is more specific. Okay, and if a young virgin girl presents with PID, think of tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is actually genital tuberculosis is actually a diagnosis of exclusion. We don't give any, we don't get any proper diagnostic features in that. Matlab, not hysteroscopy we get it, but through blood examination or Mantoux test and all that, it is ambiguous. Okay. So I'm not going into the condition or stages and all that. That is academic. But think of PID, and PID causes chronic pelvic pain, infertility, menorrhagia, dysmenorrhagia. So you have to detect it at the earliest and treat it. Medorinum, Flujaricran, PID, Netramcel, Pyrogenitol, so very good medicines. So think of it. See, hydrosalpinx. Hydrosalpinx PID in synthesis, and I think into synthesis. The single remedy is Cefia. Okay, PID. Then when it comes to metritis, ovaritis, and all that, we have lots of medicines. But PID as such in synthesis, the single medicine given is Cefia. So I had wonderful results in Cefia. Okay, hydrosalpinx for hydrosalpinx. So think of it. So this always, sometimes in PID, this ovarian cyst will be associated. And in this case, see, that was left ovarian cyst with tubular cystic extension. Even with this extension and hydrosalpinx, the doctor has suggested USG for 2 to 3 minutes. So we can safely treat PID if the adnexal mass or the adhesions is not too much, okay, as to interfere with fertility. Okay. So again, hydrosalpinx with left ovarian cyst. See, this is a maid. This is my maid actually. She had very severe menses with very painful menses, and she had very severe heavy menstrual bleeding. And she was diagnosed with this hydrosalpinx and ovarian cyst. CA 125 was normal. CA 125 usually check in endometriosis. The endometriosis for CA 125 to be of relevant value. If it is about greater than 35 nanogram per ml, it is relevant in postmenopausal women. Okay, for during premenopausal phase or during the reproductive phase, even if it is greater than 200 nanogram per ml, it's not a big issue. See, her CA 125 was normal. but hemorrhagic cyst was there. So the doctor has actually suggested MRI pelvis. Okay. So TB genitalia, leave it, leave it. Doctor, can I continue?
Oh, yes, madam, you can continue.
We'll just rapidly run through dysmenorrhea. I think that is the topic which remains,
Okay, okay, ma'am.
and a little bit of infertility with the importance of this. Okay. Okay. So amenorrhea, we all know what is primary amenorrhea and secondary amenorrhea. Other causes, we'll see it. Second, okay, primary amenorrhea, the woman has not menstruated. Okay. For AC classification, see when the patient comes to the clinic, we have all of us have studied SHAWS. There is a very big classification like hypogonadotropic, hypoeugonidotropic, hypogonadotropic. For EC diagnosis, when a woman comes to our clinic with, when a child comes to our clinic with primary amenorrhea, first look at her weight, height, her general growth, anemia, look for anemia and all that. Okay, if everything is normal but she's still not menstruating, go for blood checkup. And then as for any weight loss, symptoms of anorexia, exercise or mental stress, because most of the most common cause for primary amenorrhea in general public, it's actually hypothalamic or ovarian, hypothalamic pituitary axis, functional hypogonadic, functional hypogonadism because of exercise and all that, or weight loss, or low development, low growth, defective growth, that is deficient hypothalamic secretions, GnRH secretion, low GnRH, low FSH. So first clear that. Then second most common cause now we see is PCOD, PCOS. We can always go for, it is so common, we know what is PCOS. Ultrasound, we can go, and the other symptoms, obesity, hirsutism will also be there. Then always go for thyroid checkup, routine blood checkup will be there. And then if all comes to be normal, even the prolactin level is normal, we go for female hormones, especially FSH and estrogen level. So that is what the investigations we do. And by FSH, if it is increased, we can classify it in different techniques. But let's see, I say to you, when a woman, lady, girl comes to you with a normal breast development, that is secondary sexual characteristics developed, we have to go for imaging technique. And on imaging technique, we have two options. One is the uterus is present and the uterus is absent. Okay. When the uterus is absent, you think of Mullerian agenesis. That is the second most common cause of, after ovarian dysgenesis, that is gonadal dysgenesis, Mullerian agenesis is the cause of primary amenorrhea. In Mullerian agenesis, what happens is there will be absent uterus and absent cervix. Upper part of the vagina will not be there. Only the lower part of vagina occurs. That is AMH, anti-Mullerian hormone receptor genes with there is some problems, so that the Mullerian duct do not develop. The karyotype is 46XX, that is a female. The gonad is functioning. Breast is there means the gonad is functioning, estrogen secretion is there. So estrogen forms breast and secondary sexual characteristics. So 46XX, that is we have to go for karyotyping. Okay. Now when uterus is absent, the other condition is testicular feminizing syndrome or androgen insensitivity syndrome. Okay. Testicular feminization syndrome or androgen sensitivity syndrome, the karyotype is actually 46XY. That is genetically, the patient is a male, but the testosterone receptors, the androgen receptors, there is mutation and they don't respond to the testosterone. The peripheral tissues don't respond to testosterone. So the male characteristics penis that does not develop. There may be clitoromegaly, and because of the excess androgens, these androgens in the periphery, they are converted into estrogens. Because of the large amount of estrogen, there will be breast development, and the patient, in spite of the genetically being male, may be brought up as female. Okay, that is testicular feminization syndrome. So 46XY, we have to go for karyotyping. Now all this is normal. The uterus is present with breast development. The outflow tract defect may be there. So we go to cryptomenorrhea. That is, there may be imperforate septum, transverse septum, and all that. So that is easily visible. Hematocolpos, that is accumulation of blood within the vagina, will be there. So a simple vaginal examination will reveal that to you. Okay. Our role is not much in that. It is actually a surgical condition, but if we are able to detect it, we can give, the patient will have confidence in her, and they will definitely confidence in us, they will definitely come back. Okay. And small it has cyclical lower abdominal pain. If little kids during the age of puberty, when they are nearing puberty, they are telling of a lower abdominal pain, and after excluding all the other pelvic pathologies or gastric complaints and all that, we can also think of this. Okay. So the next conditions, when the outflow tract is normal with breast, we can think of all this hypoprolactinemia, the PCOD, and all these conditions. Okay. Now we see when the patient does not have secondary sexual characteristics, that is breast development is not there, then what all conditions we have to think. Okay. That is actually due to gonadal dysgenesis. That is, the patient doesn't have the gonad, that is ovary as gonad. Okay, that happens in case of 46XO, the Turner syndrome. The most common cause of ovarian dysgenesis or gonadal dysgenesis is Turner syndrome. We all know Turner syndrome presentation, the short statured women with webbed neck, clapped fingers, and all that. Okay, shield chest. So we can easily diagnose it. The other condition without breast is actually Savage syndrome, in which the gonadotropins are resistant to the estrogen. Sorry, gonadotropin resistance. The receptors are resistant to estrogenic action. So there will not be this breast development, all that. In these cases, it is easily detectable. Okay. Okay, so this is how clinically we can identify it. But very simple measurement, very simple thing to detect primary amenorrhea is go for all the checkups, and even the outflow tract, all the hormones and the outflow tract is normal, go for karyotyping. Okay. Now we come to secondary amenorrhea. Secondary amenorrhea. See, the for first 3 months, if a child, no, if a lady is not menstruating for first 3 months in a regular, for 3 months in a regular cycle with a history of regular menstrual cycle, then we can consider secondary amenorrhea. If it is irregular cycle, the duration should be 6 months. Okay. So one of the most common causes is pregnancy. Most common cause is pregnancy, and after that it is PCOS. Now PCOS, the criteria is Rotterdam criteria. We have to see only three. Two of the three may be present. Okay. Polycystic ovaries, we all know that necklace, pearl of neck appearance and all that, neck of pearl appearance and all that. Ovulatory dysfunction, which may be present as oligomenorrhea or amenorrhea. Hyperandrogenism, which is acne, alopecia, hirsutism, and all that. That is the symptoms or signs, clinical signs like, blood levels, hormonal levels like testosterone or hydroxyepiandrosterone may be increased. Now, two of the three features. Sometimes all the three features may not be present. So, Hair syndrome is actually hyperandrogenism, insulin resistance, and acanthosis nigricans. I'm not spending much into it. We have very much scope in PCOD because what allopathic system do is they give oral contraceptive pills to regulate the menstrual, to regulate the hormones, and then clomiphene citrate for ovulation, for induction of ovulation. And the treatment of PCOD also, we have to see what the aim of the treatment should be, what we are going to do. If the girl is unmarried, we have to just to restore the normal menstrual cycle, decrease obesity, decrease the insulin resistance, give the hirsutism, control hirsutism. And if it is a reproductive age, she desires fertility, we should treat accordingly. Okay. We have wonderful remedies like this Tuja Sepia, all that very wonderful remedies. Now I want to like present a case. This is a 14-year-old girl. She presented with polycystic ovarian disease. Um, from 12 years, in 12 years, she had a first menarche which was very profuse. And after the 3 or 4 years, she had no menses. She menstruated only when she took oral contraceptives. As she was very short in stature, they didn't mind much. Okay. But after this age, 14, 13 and a half, 14 years, what she developed hirsutism, lots of hair. And then they went for investigations. The testosterone was very much increased. It was 6.4, and also they went for free androgen index. It was increased. And the thing is, she was refractory to treatment, right? For about 3 years, she menstruated only with oral contraceptive pills. And sometimes metformin was given. They didn't take regular treatment. And what we found in MRI was a left, she had bipolar uterus. That is, really Mullerian malformation was also there. That's why there were first menses. She hadn't developed PCOD. It was normal, but after that, maybe the uterus has shrunken in size because of the PCOD or the normal, the functioning. Usually in bipolar uterus, there will be two uterus, not two segment of uterus. One will be functioning and one will be rudimentary. So the functioning may also have lost the because of lack of estrogenic action and all that. It may have the the problem is more. And actually she had come to me only last month. She's undergoing treatment. She had very obesity, acanthosis nigricans was prominent. She had much desire for sweet and salt, and she was clearly constipated. So I have given graphitis. I just want to decrease the PCOD so that at least the ovulation takes place and the estrogen acts on the endometrium, and let's see if there is some progress. Okay, and the other condition always we say that AMH is increased in PCOS. Now PCOS for diagnosis AMH is not required, and prognosis also is it required or not? That's my question. So not being an interactive session, I'm not expecting answer. See, AMH, it is stood as a costly investigation. So diagnosis of PCOD, it is actually done clinically. Okay, and very simple tests like testosterone, LH, FSH can give you the diagnosis, and USG can. Okay, so AMH is required only in case of if they are going for IVF treatment. It is actually a sign of ovarian reserve. Okay, the more the ovarian reserve, it will be along the normal range. When it is very low, the AMH is secreted from granulosa cells of ovary. Okay, so when the granulosa cells decrease, that is the follicles decrease, the AMH level will be low, and very low levels of AMH levels, the success rate of IVF or the chances of getting pregnant will be less. And very high levels of AMH occurs in PCOS because of there are numerous follicles, right? The numerous follicles secrete too much of AMH. That is also not required. Okay, not good. So the normal level is for about 1 nanogram per ml. Okay, so for prognosis of PCOS, you don't need to go for AMH. And always think of hirsutism. Hirsutism, when it is an adult onset, it may be due to PCOS. Puberty onset, it may be due to congenital adrenal hyperplasia, where there is 21 hydroxylase deficiency, and the lack of cortisol and androgens accumulates. Okay, it may present as hirsutism. And thoda rapid onset, it is due to ovarian tumors, right? Granulosa cell tumor and all that. It secretes more of androgens, estrogens, and androgens, which causes hirsutism. Okay. Now, cyst of ovary. See, we have a right ovarian hemorrhagic cyst in it. Not all hemorrhagic cyst is due to chocolate cyst or due to endometriosis. Always, when you can consider ovarian cyst, if it is less than 5 centimeter, mostly it is probably functional cyst, especially the follicular cyst, luteal cyst, theca luteal cyst, and granulosa cyst will be there. So the cyst, if it is less than 5 centimeter, mostly it is benign. Within 2 to 3 months, it will go off. Okay, corpus luteal cyst will go off within 9 months. Follicular cyst will go off within 2 months. Okay, so we can reassure the patient. Patients sometimes say complaints of abdominal pain or localized abdominal pain or sometimes intermenstrual bleeding, but mostly they will be asymptomatic. It will be routine checkup. They'll find it. So we can very confidently treat ovarian cyst provided there is no irregular septas. The septations is clear mark. Okay, irregular septations and mixing of cystic and solid areas, then the cystic cyst may be malignant and we have to proceed with caution. Okay, simple cyst, simple left adnexal cyst, simple hemorrhagic cyst, whatever it is less than 5 centimeter, we can treat with confidence and treat and repeat diagnosis after 3 months. Okay, so this is a simple cyst, again a simple cyst. Okay, ovarian cyst, abdominal bloating, but when the symptoms occurs, when there is any torsion or undergoes regeneration, there will be symptoms, and that symptoms will be very fever, high fever and all that. That is, it will present as acute abdomen. Okay, so that's a good cyst. See all the CA125 and all that, and when it becomes polycystic or polycystic. This PCOD, she's a 21-year-old woman. Her PCOD was asymptomatic. She had no problem. She's unmarried, so that didn't occur the issue of fertility. But she found it in a routine examination for gallbladder stones. Mm, So that's it. We have come to fertility, female infertility. See, it's a very big topic to cover, but always think of infertility like vaginal discharge. You go from below upwards, that is from the vagina, causing the vagina, that is from psychological dyspareunia, vaginismus to dyspareunia, acid conditions, endometriosis, and all that. Then go to the cervical factors, ineffective sperm penetration, chronic cervicitis, anti-sperm antibodies presence of in which cervical investigation for cervical mucus. Okay, then ovarian factors, uterine factors, and all that. Okay, so go upward. Some important investigations we can see. Test for ovulation, BBF is not done. Now LH OB kit is available. The LH should be greater than 15 international units when we check it on the mid-luteal phase. And progesterone, after 21 days, it should be greater than 3 nanogram per ml. We can do follicular study. Premenstrual endometrial biopsy is done on day 21. That is, as I told earlier, it is for corpus luteal deficiency, where there is deficiency of progesterone. Okay, the progesterone should be greater than at least 3 nanogram per ml. Some books say that it should be greater than 5 nanogram per ml. Along with this, if we do endometrial biopsy, the growth of the endometrial tissue, it will be less than 2 days. 2 days deficiency, 2 days growth deficiency will be there. Then it is due to corpus luteal deficiency. Different abortions it may present with cervical mucus studies and diagnostic laparoscopy. This is what we have to do. FSH and LH, we know 5 to 10, 5 to 20. Remember this. Androgen protection, testosterone, free testosterone. In females, normal females, it will be 1%. Okay, and free androgen index can be done. See, if it is greater than 4.5 PCOS. If you remember, in that case of biconic bicolous uterus, that girl had 13.5 something. Okay, so progesterone. Follicular phase, it should be less than 1, and luteal phase, it should be greater than 20. That is 21 day. After 21 day, you do that, it should be greater than 20. E2 and FSH, it should be measured on day 3. Okay, day 3 FSH is important. Day 3 FSH, the normal level should be less than 10. That is, upper limit is 5 to 10, right? Day FSH should be less in the starting. Then as a proliferative phase, late proliferative phase, it should increase. It should be less than, but still it should be less than 50. If it is greater than 25, then it means the woman chance of pregnancy is very less. You remember menopause, the follicular reserve decreases, the FSH acts on the follicles, but no estrogen is produced, so there is no negative feedback and there is an increase in FSH. Okay, FSH is got from urine of postmenopausal women. So the greater than 25 international units, there is chances of pregnancy is very less, and even in IVF, donor ovum is considered. Okay. in clomiphene secretus, it is for ovulation, that is FSH rises, that is FSH. Poor responders, that is ovarian reserve. Ovarian reserve is there or not there. Clomiphene is given to induce ovulation. In spite of that, FSH remains high. If there is no decrease in FSH, then it means ovarian reserve is very less. Okay?